What if a millionaire's first words could forever change an innocent young woman's destiny? "I'll take it slow," he told her that first night, and she, pure and young, discovered true love. A story that will shatter every social convention. Tell us where you're watching from. If you believe in true love, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button to discover how this forbidden passion will capture your heart. The fragrance of grapevines in bloom wafting from the gardens of the estate mingled with the nervousness that made her hands tremble as Emily adjusted for the 10th time the white dress her mother had chosen for that evening. The antique gold-framed mirror reflected the image of a 22-year-old woman whose honey-colored eyes hid more dreams than she had ever dared to confess. Through the window, the California sun was beginning to set, tinting the sprawling vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see with a golden-orange glow. Destiny rarely announces its visits, but when it arrives, it forever transforms the garden of our certainties, Emily thought, remembering the words her grandmother had whispered before she departed from her humble home in the small town. That day marked the beginning of her new life as housekeeper at New Hope Estate, the property of Mr. Michael Anderson, the wealthiest man in the region. For a young woman raised in the traditional values of a small California town, accepting this job meant much more than a salary. It represented an act of courage, a silent declaration of independence. The sound of tires on the gravel driveway alerted her. From her bedroom window, Emily observed the arrival of a black luxury car. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a distinguished-looking man step out, his sun-weathered face framed by prematurely graying hair, conveying a natural authority. Mr. Anderson had arrived earlier than expected. With trembling hands, Emily pulled her hair back into a simple chignon and breathed deeply. The scent of jasmine entering through the window gave her unexpected courage. As she descended the marble staircase, each step resonated like the prelude to a destiny she could not yet imagine. "Welcome to New Hope," he said, when their gazes finally met in the main foyer. His voice, warmer than Emily had imagined, contrasted with the imposing architecture of the century-old estate. Mr. Anderson's eyes, deep blue and melancholic, seemed to study her with curiosity. "Thank you, sir," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I hope to serve well in this house." An almost imperceptible smile crossed Mr. Anderson's face as James, an elderly butler, took his employer's hat and gloves. "I take things slowly," he said, observing how she maintained a serene gaze despite her evident nervousness. "I want you to feel at home here." That evening, while meticulously organizing books in the library under the soft glow of antique lamps, Emily felt the weight of someone's gaze upon her. Turning around, she found Mr. Anderson watching her from the doorway with an expression she had never before seen in a man's eyes. It wasn't desire, nor mere curiosity. It was recognition, as if he had found in her something long sought after. The aroma of freshly baked apple pie, wafting from the kitchen, mingled with the soft sound of rain beginning to fall on the slate roof of the century-old house. And at that precise moment, under the roof of New Hope Estate, two destinies began silently to intertwine, like the vines climbing the white walls of the estate's courtyard. The news that Emily Wilson, the carpenter's daughter from town, was now working at Mr. Michael Anderson's estate spread like spilled wine among the inhabitants of Oakidge. Barely a week had passed when the first murmurings began to weave their invisible web of speculation. On Sunday, after service at the small stone church, Emily felt the weight of stares upon her. Her mother, Margaret, a petite woman with a firm character, waited for her at the entrance with a worried expression and a Bible clutched firmly between her fingers. "Daughter, we need to talk," she said, taking her arm with more force than necessary. "People are talking, and what they're saying doesn't please me." The town cafe, with its wrought-iron tables and the persistent aroma of freshly baked scones, maintained an uncomfortable silence when they both entered. Emily kept her head high, although a treacherous blush tinged her cheeks. "What's so urgent, Mother?" she asked when they finally sat in a secluded corner. Margaret leaned across the table, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "It's not appropriate for an unmarried young lady to live under the same roof as a man, Emily. People are saying things that tarnish your name and that of our family." Emily felt a pang of indignation. For 7 days she had worked tirelessly, organizing the library, supervising the maids, planning menus with the cook. Her room, a modest space in the service wing, was as far from Mr. Anderson's quarters as possible. "I'm not doing anything wrong, Mother," she replied firmly. "I'm just working honestly." "Mr. Anderson has a reputation," Margaret insisted, discreetly making the sign of the cross. "They say no woman has managed to trap him in marriage because he doesn't respect a young lady's virtues." The steaming tea in front of Emily seemed to lose its aroma. Could this be the same man who had spent the previous week reading silently in the library while she worked? The same one who had asked about her family with genuine interest and had attentively listened to every word? "I'm asking you to resign, daughter," Margaret continued. "Your father and I have spoken with the baker. His son William is interested in formally courting you. He's a good boy from a respectable family." A crystalline laugh interrupted their conversation. Emily looked up to find Jessica Chambers, the mayor's daughter, observing her from a nearby table with barely disguised mockery. Her friends whispered behind their hands, casting furtive glances in her direction. Something ignited inside Emily, a small flame she had never felt before. "I will not resign, Mother," she said, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. "For the first time, I'm making a decision based on my own desires. I am an honest, hard-working woman, and I've done nothing to shame our family." The road back to the estate was solitary and longer than usual. The century-old oak trees seemed to whisper secrets to the wind as Emily reflected on her decision. The cost of staying would be facing the judgment of the entire community where she had grown up, but something within her, something new and brave, told her this was just the first of many obstacles she would need to overcome. When the towers of New Hope Estate appeared on the horizon, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Emily felt a strange sense of belonging that she had never experienced in the town where she was born. Mr. Anderson was waiting for her at the entrance, as if he had sensed her return. His eyes, usually reserved, showed a shadow of concern. "Is everything all right, Emily?" he asked, studying her face carefully. For a moment Emily considered lying, saying that everything was perfectly fine, but something in Mr. Anderson's gaze invited honesty. "The town talks, sir," she responded simply, "and my family listens." Mr. Anderson nodded slowly, as if he perfectly understood what had not been said. "People fear what they don't understand," he said finally, offering her his arm in a surprisingly informal gesture. "Come, James has prepared hot chocolate in the library. Nothing dispels shadows better than a good book and a warm drink." As they walked toward the library, Emily felt that each step distanced her a little more from the path others had traced for her and brought her closer to an unknown but intriguing future. The decision was made. She would remain at New Hope Estate regardless of the rumors that might flourish among the vines. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the stained glass windows when Emily discovered Mr. Anderson's secret. She had gone to the library before the rest of the house awakened, taking advantage of the morning quiet to reorganize the collection of English classics that had been left pending the previous day. The book fell accidentally when she tried to reach the top shelf. A brown leather notebook, worn at the corners, with the initials M.A. engraved in gold on the cover. Upon opening it, her heart skipped a beat. Handwritten verses, some crossed out, others emphatically underlined, filled the pages with an elegant but passionate calligraphy. "It is not the silence that hurts, but the words that were never born. Loneliness is not the absence of company, but the presence of souls that do not see yours." Emily abruptly closed the notebook, aware that she was invading an intimate space. But the discovery haunted her throughout the day. Mr. Anderson, the wine entrepreneur whose coldness in business was legendary, secretly wrote poetry. A sensitive facet that completely contrasted with his public image. 3 days later, during dinner, Emily was startled when Mr. Anderson casually mentioned, "I've noticed that the romantic poetry books have been reorganized. Was that your doing?" Emily's fork stopped midway between her plate and her lips. The dining room, with its silver candelabras and paintings of stern ancestors, suddenly seemed too small. "Yes, sir," she replied cautiously. "I hope I didn't make a mistake." Mr. Anderson studied her over his glass of red wine. "On the contrary," he said with a half-smile. "You placed Keats next to Wordsworth, an interesting choice. Do you enjoy poetry, Emily?" Something in his gaze invited sincerity. "Poetry allows us to express what the soul feels when everyday words prove insufficient," she responded, surprising herself with her boldness. A dense silence fell over the dining room, broken only by the soft tinkle of silver cutlery. When Emily finally dared to look at Mr. Anderson, she found a new gleam in his eyes, as if he had discovered something unexpected and valuable. That night, before retiring, Emily found on her bed a copy of Selected Poems by John Keats. There was no note, but none was necessary. The silent message hung in the air. A bridge had been extended between two souls beginning to recognize each other. The second small revelation came a month later, when Mr. Anderson found Emily's diary forgotten in the rose garden. The open pages revealed her reflections on Wuthering Heights, comparing the tempestuous love of Catherine and Heathcliff with the ideal of romantic love. Far from discreetly returning the notebook, Mr. Anderson mentioned it during breakfast. "Your literary analyses are remarkable, Emily," he said, personally serving her a cup of tea. "Few people manage to capture the essence of Emily Brontë as you have done." A blush tinged Emily's cheeks. "You read my diary." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Only the page that was open," he defended himself, with an expression somewhere between guilty and fascinated. "But it was enough to be impressed." "Where did you study literature?" Emily lowered her gaze to her cup. "I never formally studied. My father couldn't afford it," she confessed. "But the town minister lent me books, and I simply read everything that fell into my hands." Something changed in Mr. Anderson's expression, an almost imperceptible softening in the lines of his face. "Sometimes the best libraries are those we build ourselves, book by book," he said quietly. The third small revelation occurred during the visit of a prominent wine merchant from New York. After the business dinner, the guest insisted on presenting Emily with an expensive emerald brooch, clearly misinterpreting her position in the house. "You're too beautiful to be just an employee, miss," said the New Yorker with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Surely you'll accept this small token of admiration." Before Mr. Anderson could intervene, Emily responded with a dignity that surprised both men. "Your generosity honors me, sir, but I must decline. My work here has value because it is based on respect, and that respect has no price." Later, when the guest had left, Mr. Anderson found Emily in the library, nervously reorganizing books that were already perfectly ordered. "What you did tonight," he began. "Did it cause problems with your associate?" she interrupted, worried. "Mr. Anderson shook his head, his eyes bright in the dim light. "It reminded me of something I had forgotten, that true elegance cannot be bought with money." That night, as the moon bathed the vineyards in silver light, two solitary souls began to recognize, still in silence, that something extraordinary was growing between them, as natural and inevitable as the vines that flourished under the California sun. The month of September brought with it the Harvest Festival of Oakidge, an explosion of color, music, and tradition that transformed the town for a week. The streets filled with stalls where wine flowed generously, the aroma of apple pies and roast beef permeated the air, and the sound of fiddles and banjos extended until dawn. Emily observed the preparations from the library window when Mr. Anderson entered silently. "Aren't you planning to attend?" he asked, noticing the young woman's nostalgic gaze. Emily started slightly. After 3 months at New Hope Estate, she still wasn't accustomed to the way he appeared unexpectedly, as if he could intuit her thoughts. "It wouldn't be appropriate," she replied cautiously. "My presence would cause more comments." Mr. Anderson approached until he stood beside her, contemplating the distant town lights. "What if you attended as my guest?" he proposed, his voice deliberately casual. "The estate always has its own booth at the festival." Emily's heart leaped. Attending the festival as the employer's guest would only fuel the rumors, but the idea of missing the traditions she so loved seemed painful. "James and Mrs. Parker will also be coming," added Mr. Anderson, as if he had read her concerns. "And I've invited Dr. Thompson, the town doctor, with his family. It will be a perfectly respectable outing." 2 nights later, Emily crossed the festival entrance wearing a blue gingham dress, a loan from Mrs. Parker that had been adjusted to her size. Curious glances followed her as she walked alongside Mr. Anderson, who wore an impeccable dark suit with a fedora hat. The New Hope Estate booth, decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, offered a corner of relative privacy. As the hours passed, Emily was surprised to find herself gradually relaxing. The doctor and his wife proved to be affable conversationalists, and James shared anecdotes from his 50 years in service to the Anderson family. "I've never seen the boss attend the festival for more than an hour," Mrs. Parker discreetly commented while serving mulled wine, "and we've already been here for 3. When a group of musicians began to play a lively country dance, Emily felt the rhythm coursing through her body like an electric current. Her fingers unconsciously tapped on the table, following the beat. "Dance," Mr. Anderson suddenly said, observing her intently. "I can see you want to." Emily shook her head, though her body seemed to vibrate with the music. "There's no partner," she excused herself. "I'll dance with you," Mr. Anderson declared, standing and extending his hand in a gesture that silenced conversations around them. For an instant, Emily hesitated. Dancing with her employer in full view of the entire town crossed an invisible line, but something in Mr. Anderson's gaze, a mixture of challenge and plea, made her accept his hand. In the center of the booth, surrounded by astonished looks, Emily and Mr. Anderson began to dance, at first with cautious movements, then with growing confidence. She, raised among these traditions, moved with natural grace. He with the precision of someone who had learned through obligation, but now danced for pleasure. "Where did you learn to dance like this, sir?" Emily asked during a turn, genuinely surprised by his skill. "My mother insisted," he answered, his eyes never leaving hers. "She said a man should honor the traditions of his land, even when the world takes him far from them." When the music ended, spontaneous applause erupted in the booth. Emily, flushed from exertion and emotion, noticed that Mr. Anderson kept her hand in his a few seconds longer than necessary. The journey back to the estate, under a sky studded with stars, transpired in a companionable silence. Inside the car, the scent of jasmine from Emily's perfume mingled with the aroma of tobacco and sandalwood emanating from Mr. Anderson. "Thank you for tonight," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I had forgotten how much love exists in our traditions." Mr. Anderson observed her in the dimness, his face partially hidden by shadows. "Sometimes we need to distance ourselves from something to remember why we love it," he responded gravely. Upon arriving at New Hope Estate, as Emily descended from the car, she noticed someone watching them from the main window, an elegant female figure who quickly disappeared behind the curtains. "Are you expecting visitors, sir?" she asked, suddenly uneasy. Mr. Anderson followed her gaze and his expression momentarily hardened. "No," he replied dryly. "But it seems they've arrived anyway." The fragrance of blooming vines that permeated the night seemed suddenly more intense, like a portent that the carefully constructed balance of those months was about to be broken. The name Victoria Montgomery floated through the corridors of New Hope Estate, like an invasive perfume that refused to dissipate. She had arrived one morning in August, unannounced, in a luxury convertible, and accompanied by more luggage than the servants could count. "An old family friend?" Mr. Anderson had tersely explained when he introduced her to Emily, with a formality that contrasted with his usual warmth. But the whispers among the staff told another story. Victoria was the daughter of a powerful Boston businessman, and for years had been the ideal candidate to become Mr. Anderson's wife. 2 wine business dynasties united, a perfect alliance that had only been prevented by his inexplicable resistance. Emily tried to keep her distance, concentrating on her tasks with renewed dedication. However, it was impossible to ignore Victoria's presence, a 35-year-old woman whose mature beauty was enhanced with designer dresses and dazzling jewelry. "How charming that Mr. Anderson has such a young and quaint housekeeper," Victoria commented one afternoon, finding Emily in the rose garden. "From what little town did you say you come, dear?" "From Oakidge, ma'am," Emily responded, maintaining her composure while feeling the woman's eyes evaluating her like someone examining a defective piece. Victoria distractedly caressed a white rose with her bejeweled fingers. "Michael has always had a strange interest in simple things," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's one of his peculiarities." Dinners became exercises in resistance. Victoria dominated the conversation with anecdotes of Boston high society. Names of senators and socialites peppered her stories. Mr. Anderson responded with distant courtesy, while Emily remained silent, acutely aware of her position. One night, after dinner, Emily found Mr. Anderson alone in the library, contemplating the fire with a somber expression and an untouched glass of brandy in his hand. "May I retire now, sir?" she asked from the doorway, reluctant to interrupt his thoughts. Mr. Anderson seemed to return from far away. His eyes, when they rested on her, contained a mixture of weariness and something that could be longing. "Emily," he said quietly, "do you think the expectations of others can become chains stronger than any prison?" The question floated in the air, laden with implicit meanings. Emily took a step towards him. "I believe expectations are like shadows," she carefully responded. "They seem gigantic when the sun sets, but with enough light, they disappear." A fleeting smile illuminated Mr. Anderson's face. "Where do you get these answers?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "Sometimes you seem wiser than people with 3 times your age and education." Emily blushed slightly. "Perhaps because I've had less opportunity to complicate what's simple," she answered with simplicity. For a moment, the silence between them was filled with unspoken words. Mr. Anderson took a step toward her, reducing the distance separating them to barely 3 feet. The aroma of brandy and aged wood enveloped Emily, intoxicating. "There's something you should know," he began, his voice a tone deeper. "Victoria isn't here by chance. Her father and mine arranged our marriage years ago. I've been postponing that decision longer than I should have." Emily's heart contracted painfully. Of course, a man like Mr. Anderson must marry someone of his class. It was the natural order of things, the path the world expected him to follow. What had she expected? "Congratulations, sir," she managed to say, grateful that her voice did not betray the sudden desolation she felt. "Miss Montgomery seems a distinguished lady." Mr. Anderson studied her intensely, as if searching for something in her face. "Is that all you have to say?" he asked in a tone Emily couldn't interpret. "What more could I say?" she responded, lowering her gaze. The pendulum clock struck 11, its sound reverberating in the quietness of the library. Mr. Anderson seemed about to speak, but finally nodded briefly. "You may retire, Emily. Good night." That night, Emily made a decision that would change the course of history. With trembling but determined hands, she wrote a letter of resignation. It was the right thing, the dignified thing to do. She would leave before her feelings, which she could no longer deny, completely betrayed her. At dawn, with the first rays of sun filtering through the vineyard, Emily left the letter on the library desk and went out to the garden to silently bid farewell to New Hope Estate. It was there, among the roses, where Mr. Anderson found her. "What does this mean?" he asked, holding the letter with an indecipherable expression. "I cannot stay," she responded simply. "Because of Victoria," he insisted, stepping closer. "Because of me," Emily corrected, gathering all her courage. "Because I've realized I'm developing feelings that are not appropriate for my position." The words hung suspended between them, as fragile and yet as powerful as the dewdrops trembling on the white petals. Mr. Anderson looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Emily," he began, but she interrupted him. "Please don't say anything that we'll both regret later." At that moment, Victoria's voice broke the spell, calling Mr. Anderson from the house. He briefly closed his eyes as if gathering strength. "This conversation isn't over," he said firmly, tucking the resignation letter into his jacket. "I ask that you not make any decision until we've spoken properly." As she watched him walk away toward the house, Emily understood that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The garden that had once seemed a refuge now felt like a labyrinth in which they were both trapped, seeking each other while invisible forces tried to separate them. The August sun beat down relentlessly on the vineyards of New Hope Estate when Emily discovered Mr. Anderson's best-kept secret. She had climbed the hill that dominated the property, seeking a moment of solitude after a week of unbearable tension. Victoria's constant presence, the loaded silences during meals, the furtive glances with Mr. Anderson, everything had become a test for her nerves. From the summit she spotted a small stone building she hadn't noticed before, partially hidden among cypress trees. Curiosity drove her to approach. It wasn't a winery or a storehouse, but a school. A dozen children between 6 and 12 years old were receiving lessons from a young woman whose face seemed vaguely familiar. "May I help you?" asked the teacher upon noticing her presence. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," Emily responded, confused. "I didn't know there was a school here." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Sarah, Thomas's sister, the foreman. Mr. Anderson built this school 3 years ago for the children of the estate workers," she explained. "Children from town whose families can't afford the public school also attend." Emily observed the interior through the open door, Well-maintained wooden desks, a small library, maps on the walls. Everything simple but of quality. "And who finances this?" she asked, though she already intuited the answer. "Mr. Anderson, of course," Sarah responded naturally. "He pays my salary and all the materials, but he doesn't like it to be talked about. He says education isn't charity, but justice." This revelation illuminated Mr. Anderson in a completely new light. The man whom society saw as a calculating businessman was secretly financing the education of the most disadvantaged children in the region. That same afternoon, a violent summer storm broke over New Hope Estate. The wind lashed at the windows, and lightning intermittently illuminated the darkened corridors. Emily ran along the upper gallery, closing shutters, when she unexpectedly encountered Mr. Anderson. "I was looking for you," he said, his voice barely audible over the thunder. "We need to talk." A particularly violent thunder shook the estate, and the lights flickered until completely extinguishing, plunging the hallway into darkness. Only occasional lightning illuminated their faces. "It would be better to wait in the library," suggested Mr. Anderson, offering her his arm. "James will light the lamps there." The library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and its smell of leather and old paper, seemed a welcoming refuge amid the storm. James quickly lit several oil lamps and stoked the fire in the fireplace before discreetly retiring. For a few minutes both remained silent, contemplating the dancing flames. Emily finally gathered the courage to speak. "Today I discovered the school on the hill," she said, carefully observing his reaction. Mr. Anderson seemed momentarily surprised, then sketched a resigned smile. "I see. And now you'll think I'm some kind of secret philanthropist." "I think you're a man who understands the value of opportunities," Emily responded with sincerity. "As someone who never had access to a formal education, I can appreciate what you're doing for those children." Mr. Anderson looked at her intensely, as if evaluating how much he could open up. "My grandfather was a railroad worker," he finally confessed. "My father, through brutal work and some questionable decisions, managed to buy his first vineyards. I received a privileged education in New York, but I've never forgotten where we come from." The rain beat heavily against the windows, creating a backdrop for this unexpected confession. Emily felt that the invisible barriers between them were beginning to crumble. "Why keep it a secret?" she asked. "It's something anyone would be proud of." "True charity doesn't seek recognition," he responded, contemplating the flames. "Besides, I have a reputation as a tough businessman that serves me well. Weaknesses in this world are like open wounds. They attract vultures." Emily nodded, suddenly understanding the multiple layers that composed Michael Anderson. "And yet you've told me," she observed softly. Mr. Anderson raised his gaze, his eyes reflecting the dance of the flames. "Because with you, Emily, I don't feel the need to maintain those defenses." The confession hung between them, as powerful as it was fragile. The clock marked the hours, and the storm continued, but neither seemed willing to break the moment. They talked for hours, as they had never done before, about books and dreams, fears and hopes. Mr. Anderson told her about the arranged marriage his parents had planned for him in his youth, a marriage he had refused, preferring solitude to a life of falsehood. "And now, Victoria," Emily murmured, unable to contain the question that tormented her. "Victoria represents what is expected of me," he responded with resignation. "The easy path, the sensible alliance, what my father would have approved of." "And what is it that you truly desire?" Emily dared to ask, her heart beating wildly. A lightning bolt illuminated Mr. Anderson's face, revealing an intensity in his gaze that made Emily hold her breath. "I think you already know the answer," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The storm began to abate with the arrival of dawn. When the first rays of sun filtered through the windows, they illuminated two people, transformed by a night of confessions. What had begun as a conversation between employer and employee had evolved into an encounter between two souls that mutually recognized each other. Upon leaving the library, Emily paused at the threshold. "What will we do now?" she asked, aware that there was no turning back. Mr. Anderson looked at her with a mixture of determination and vulnerability that he had never before shown. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he responded. "Choose my own path." Mr. Anderson's decision fell like lightning on a clear day. The news spread quickly from the main house to the most distant workers' cottages. Victoria Montgomery had abruptly departed for Boston, her numerous pieces of luggage hastily loaded into her car. Emily watched from the library window as the dust raised by the car wheels vanished in the distance. Her heart beat, with a mixture of relief and apprehension. What had happened? The answer came that same afternoon when Mr. Anderson requested her presence in his office. She found him standing by the window overlooking the vineyards, contemplating the horizon with an indecipherable expression. "She decided to leave," said Emily, not as a question, but as a statement. "I asked her to leave," he corrected without turning. "I told her I won't marry her now or ever." Emily remained silent, aware that any word could break the delicate balance of the moment. "Do you know what she said before leaving?" continued Mr. Anderson, finally turning to look at her. "That I was a fool for ruining a perfect alliance for a servant without name or fortune." The words struck Emily like a dagger, not because they were new, but because they crudely exposed the reality that they both faced. "Perhaps she's right," she murmured, lowering her gaze. Mr. Anderson crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping in front of her. "Look at me, Emily," he asked with a voice soft but firm. When she raised her eyes, he continued, "I've spent my entire life building a fortune to honor my father's sacrifice. I've multiplied vineyards, conquered foreign markets, made Anderson wine a name respected from California to London. And in all that time, do you know what I've discovered?" Emily shook her head slightly. "That wealth without purpose is like wine without flavor. It may impress with its appearance, but leaves empty those who taste it." A solitary tear slid down Emily's cheek. Mr. Anderson gently dried it with his thumb, a gesture so intimate that it seemed to stop time around them. "I can't offer you an illustrious name or a refined education," she said with a trembling voice. "The world will never understand." "To hell with the world," interrupted Mr. Anderson, with a vehemence that surprised her. "I've lived too many years worrying about appearances, about what people will say. But when I'm among these vines, when I taste the wine that the earth offers, I understand that what's authentic needs no justification." The office, with its maps of vineyards and accounting books, suddenly seemed too small to contain the intensity of the moment. Through the open window, the aroma of warm earth and ripening grapes floated in the air, reminding them that beyond those walls existed a world governed by natural cycles, not by social conventions. "There's something else you should know," continued Mr. Anderson, taking her hands in his. "Tomorrow important visitors will come. The senator and his family. It was arranged months ago, before everything changed." Emily tried to withdraw her hands, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation, but Mr. Anderson wouldn't allow it. "No, listen to me. I want you to be present not as my housekeeper, but as my guest. Seated at my table as my equal." The proposal was so bold, so contrary to all social norms, that Emily was left speechless. "That would cause a scandal," she finally managed to say. "The senator would never accept it." "Then I'll know he's not the kind of person with whom I want to do business," Mr. Anderson responded with simplicity. "Emily, I'm tired of living half a life. You've reminded me what it is to feel passion not just for work, but for life itself." The last rays of the setting sun bathed the room in golden and copper tones, as if nature itself wanted to underline the importance of the moment. Emily felt she was at the edge of a precipice. One step forward could mean the fall, but it could also reveal a landscape of possibilities she had never imagined. "I'm afraid," she confessed in a whisper. Mr. Anderson nodded with understanding. "Fear is the natural companion of important decisions," he said. "When I graft a vine, there's always the fear that it won't take, that the effort will be in vain. But without that risk, we would never know new flavors, new possibilities." Emily briefly closed her eyes, absorbing the simple but profound wisdom of his words. When she opened them, a new determination shone in them. "I will be present tomorrow," she said. "Not because you asked me, but because I too am tired of living half a life." Mr. Anderson brought her hands to his lips, kissing them reverently. "There's something more," he said, his voice taking on a solemn tone. "Something I need to show you." He led her out of the office, through a corridor that Emily had never traversed, to a small carved wooden door. Upon opening it, he revealed a spiral staircase, ascending to what appeared to be a tower. "The Vintner's Tower," he explained as they climbed. "My grandfather built it to watch over the vineyards, but I converted it into my personal refuge." The circular room at the top of the tower left Emily breathless. Windows in all directions offered a panoramic view of the property. Vineyards that extended as far as the eye could see, silvered olive trees under the evening light, the town in the distance. But what impressed her most were the walls covered with bookshelves filled not with accounting or viticulture books, but with poetry, philosophy, art. In the center of the room, on an easel, rested an open notebook full of annotations and sketches. "My true work," said Mr. Anderson with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I'm writing a book about the philosophy of wine, not as a beverage, but as a metaphor for life. Each harvest teaches us about patience, about accepting what we cannot control, about transformation." Emily slowly toured the room, absorbing each detail with amazement. This was the real Michael Anderson, the man behind the businessman, the dreamer hidden beneath the pragmatist. "It's beautiful," she finally said, turning toward him. "All of this, your vision." Mr. Anderson approached until he stood before her, the last ray of sun illuminating their faces. "I've never shown this place to anyone," he confessed. "It's my heart exposed." And then, with the naturalness of something long awaited, their lips met in a kiss both soft and deep, sealing a silent promise as the sun set over the vineyards of New Hope Estate. The fine china gleamed under the light of silver candelabras. Emily, seated to Mr. Anderson's right, felt each look as a judgment, each whisper as a condemnation. The cobalt-blue dress he had insisted on gifting her, hastily made by the town seamstress, felt like an inadequate armor for the social battle she was waging. The senator, a corpulent man with a severe face framed by graying sideburns, alternated looks of incredulity and disdain between her and her host. His wife, the senator's lady, maintained a rigid smile that didn't reach her eyes, while their daughter Catherine, a young woman of Emily's age, but with the haughtiness that generations of privilege confer, barely disguised her displeasure. "I must confess, Anderson, that when I accepted your invitation, I expected to meet Miss Montgomery," commented the senator, as James served the first course. "The rumors in Boston were taking for granted the announcement of your engagement this summer." Mr. Anderson maintained his composure, though Emily noticed how his knuckles whitened around his wine glass. "Rumors tend to precede facts, Senator," he responded with studied neutrality. "Victoria is an admirable woman, but our paths have taken different directions." The senator's wife directed an evaluating look toward Emily. "And excuse me, I don't recall your surname." "Wilson, ma'am," Emily responded with a calm she didn't feel. "Emily Wilson. Miss Wilson is—" She left the question floating in the air, laden with insinuations. Mr. Anderson intervened firmly. "Miss Wilson is an exceptional woman whose intelligence and sensitivity have transformed New Hope Estate," he declared, his gaze challenging the senator to contradict him. "Her knowledge of classical literature surpasses that of many university professors I've known." An uncomfortable silence descended over the table. Emily felt a blush rising from her neck. Mr. Anderson's exaggeration, though well-intentioned, only made things worse. She didn't need to be converted into something she wasn't to be valued. "Literature," repeated young Catherine with barely disguised sarcasm. "What an unusual pastime for someone of my background, you mean?" Emily completed, holding her gaze. "Sometimes, miss, it's precisely the lack of privileges that drives us to seek riches that aren't measured in dollars." The tension was palpable. The sound of silverware against china seemed amplified in the silence that followed. Mr. Anderson observed Emily with a mixture of pride and concern. Dinner continued with forced conversations about harvests and international markets. When the ladies retired to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen with their brandies and cigars, Emily faced what she feared most, being alone with the women of aristocracy. "It must be fascinating to go from servant to whatever you are now," commented Catherine, fanning herself with affectation. "A real fairy tale." The senator's wife studied Emily as one examines a curious specimen. "Mr. Anderson has always been an impulsive man," she added with feigned kindness. "But California society has a long memory, dear, and it's not usually indulgent with those who try to rise beyond their station." Emily felt that each word was a small cut, precise and calculated. For an instant she doubted. Were they right? Was it all an illusion destined to vanish? The door suddenly opened and the gentleman entered the drawing room. Mr. Anderson immediately sought Emily with his gaze, as if to ensure she was all right. But something had changed in his expression. A shadow of concern crossed his face. Later, when the guests had departed, Emily found Mr. Anderson in the library, contemplating the fire with a somber expression, an untouched glass of brandy in his hand. "I'm sorry," she said from the threshold. "I was a failure tonight." Mr. Anderson looked up, surprised. "A failure?" "Emily, you were the only authentic person at that table. But I didn't manage to impress them," she insisted, advancing toward him. "And clearly, that was important." Mr. Anderson let out a tired sigh. "The senator controls export licenses to Europe," he explained. "Without his support, I'd lose contracts worth thousands of dollars." The reality of the world in which they moved fell upon Emily with all its weight. It wasn't just social judgment at stake. It was livelihoods, workers, families that depended on the estate. And he made it clear that he didn't approve of "our situation," concluded Emily, the pieces painfully falling into place. "He was more direct in private," confirmed Mr. Anderson. "He said he wouldn't do business with a man who confuses a maid with a lady." The words hurt Emily more than she wanted to admit. Not for the insult, but because they crudely exposed the truth. The world would not easily allow them to cross the lines that separated them. "I understand," she said quietly, stepping back. "You can't risk everything for a whim." Mr. Anderson stood up abruptly, spilling the brandy. "A whim?" he repeated, his voice tense. "Is that what you believe you are to me?" "I don't know," Emily responded with sincerity. "I only know that I'm an obstacle between you and the world to which you belong." Mr. Anderson advanced toward her, his face a mask of contradictory emotions. "The world to which I belong," he repeated bitterly. "A world of hypocrisy, of loveless marriages, of watered-down wine sold as special reserve. Is that really my place?" Emily had no answer. In the silence that followed, the tick-tock of the clock seemed to mark the rhythm of an inevitable decision forming. "I need time," Mr. Anderson finally said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Time to find another solution, to secure the contracts without yielding to the senator's social extortion." Emily nodded, a knot forming in her throat. She perfectly understood what he wasn't saying. He needed time away from her, space to evaluate if what they felt was worth all the consequences. "Of course," she responded, instinctively adopting the formal tone of the housekeeper she once was. "Perhaps it's better that I temporarily return to my former functions, to facilitate things while you decide." Mr. Anderson seemed to want to protest, but finally nodded with a defeated expression. The distance between them, non-existent during the previous weeks, now widened like a canyon impossible to cross. "I only ask one thing of you," said Emily before retiring. "Whatever your decision may be, let it truly be yours. Not what the world expects, nor even what I would wish." That night, as the moon bathed the vineyards with its silver light, two people contemplated the same sky from different windows of the same house, separated not by walls, but by the invisible yet powerful chains of a social order that did not forgive those who dared to challenge it. The library had become Emily's refuge during the weeks following the senator's visit. There, among yellowed pages and the smell of aged leather, she could momentarily escape the painful distance that had been established between her and Mr. Anderson. He now spent long days in San Francisco and New York, meeting with merchants and vintners, returning late and locking himself in his office. The shared dinners, conversations under the stars, moments of complicity, everything seemed to belong to another life, to a dream from which they had both abruptly awakened. One rainy September afternoon, while reorganizing the history section, Emily discovered a volume bound in green leather that had gone unnoticed until then. It had no title on the spine, only the initials W.A. engraved in faded gold. Intrigued, she opened it to find a diary dated 50 years earlier, written in a firm and elegant calligraphy. "Today, I bought my first vineyard. Just 3 acres of rocky land that no one wanted, but mine at last." The notary looked at me with contempt when I signed with my mark, as I still don't know how to write my full name. But Elizabeth has promised to teach me to read and write, my Elizabeth, so above me in birth and education, and yet she looks at me as if I were a king. Emily was breathless. This must be the diary of Mr. Anderson's grandfather, the railroad worker who had initiated the Anderson wine dynasty. She continued reading, increasingly absorbed. Elizabeth's father came today, furious as a bull. He says he'd rather see her dead than married to an illiterate labourer. Elizabeth cried afterward, but she remained firm. "I'll choose you 1,000 times," she told me, "even if I have to renounce everything." The story unfolded page after page, young William Anderson struggling to make his small vineyard prosper while secretly loving Elizabeth Thornton, daughter of a small landowner fallen on hard times. An impossible love according to the norms of the time, but which had persisted against all obstacles. Today we married at dawn in the small chapel of St. Mary, only the old priest as witness. Elizabeth has left behind her name, her home, the approval of her family. She says in exchange she has gained freedom and true love. I will build for her a life that justifies such sacrifice. I swear by the land we now work together. Emily couldn't stop reading. She spent hours immersed in those pages that related triumphs and failures, the purchase of more land, the birth of a son, the first bottles with the Anderson wine label. The boy is 10 years old and already shows his mother's sharp intelligence and my stubbornness. Elizabeth insists that he should receive a formal education, not like me, who can barely read and write this diary that she encouraged me to begin. She says our son should move between two worlds, knowing the value of the land and hard work, but also books and ideas, that he should be a bridge, not a rupture. The sound of footsteps interrupted her reading. Emily looked up to find Mr. Anderson observing her from the doorway with an indecipherable expression. "I see you've found my grandfather's diary," he said, advancing toward her. Emily closed the book reverently. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude on family history," she apologized. Mr. Anderson shook his head, taking a seat across from her. "There's no intrusion," he assured. "In fact, it's strangely appropriate that you found it precisely now." A silence laden with meaning floated between them. It was the first time in weeks they were truly alone, that they allowed themselves to look directly at each other. "Your grandmother renounced much for love," commented Emily, caressing the diary's cover. "And my grandfather dedicated his life to proving it had been worth it," added Mr. Anderson. "When I was 12, he told me his story. He said, 'Michael, the Andersons don't come from nobility, we come from courage, never forget that.'" Emily observed Mr. Anderson with renewed understanding. His current struggle was not so different from what his grandfather had faced, only in the reverse direction. Now it was he who had socially ascended, but remained trapped between two worlds. "And did you forget?" she asked softly. Mr. Anderson diverted his gaze to the windows that showed the rain falling on the gardens. "Perhaps," he admitted, "or perhaps I just buried it under layers of ambition and expectations. My father converted my grandfather's success into an empire, but also transformed our history into a shameful secret. The Andersons are respectable businessmen now," he would say. "Leave the past where it belongs." Emily felt a pang of empathy. Family expectations, traditions, appearances. Wasn't that what she was also fighting against? "I've been thinking a lot these weeks," continued Mr. Anderson, "about what really matters, about the legacy I want to leave." Emily's heart accelerated. She had awaited this moment with equal longing and fear. "And have you reached a conclusion?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Anderson looked at her directly, his eyes reflecting a renewed determination. "The senator has withdrawn his support, as was to be expected," he informed with surprising serenity. "I've lost the European contracts." Emily felt the ground sink beneath her feet. This was precisely what she had feared, what had kept her awake during countless nights, being the cause of Mr. Anderson's ruin. "I'm so sorry," she began, but he interrupted her with a gesture. "Don't be sorry," he said firmly, "because it has forced me to seek new paths. I've been in New York meeting with merchants who don't care about California gossip, only about the quality of the wine. And I've made a decision, Emily." He stood and walked to the window, contemplating the rain that was beginning to abate. "I'm going to divide New Hope Estate," he announced. "Half of the vineyards will be converted into a cooperative for the workers. Each family will have a share in the profits, and the school will be expanded to include training in viticulture and commerce." Emily listened to him in amazement. It was a revolutionary plan, one that would challenge all the landowner traditions of the region. But that would mean— She didn't finish the sentence, understanding the implications. "It would mean less personal wealth, yes," he completed, turning to her, "but more fidelity to the values that truly matter. to what my grandfather and grandmother built together. The rain had completely ceased. A ray of sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the library with a golden light that seemed to symbolize the dawn of a new era. "It's a brave decision," said Emily, admiring his resolution. "It's the only possible decision if I want to look at myself in the mirror each morning," he responded. "But there's another decision I've made, Emily, one that is mine alone, as you asked it to be." He approached her, and to her surprise, knelt, taking her hands in his. "I've decided that I prefer a life of authenticity at your side than an existence of appearances without you," he declared, his voice vibrant with emotion. "The world may judge us, business may suffer, but no price is too high for the opportunity to build something true." Emily's eyes filled with tears. After weeks of uncertainty and pain, the words she had so longed to hear finally arrived, not as a concession, but as a powerful affirmation. Outside, the sun fully emerged from among the clouds, bathing the vineyards with a light that revealed each leaf, each nascent bunch of grapes, in its true and splendid form. Like the love that, after the storm, finally showed itself in all its magnitude. The discovery occurred during renovations of the east wing of the estate. Emily was supervising the transformation of several rooms into classrooms for the expanded school, when one of the masons knocked down a false wall, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside, a carved wooden box contained a bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon faded by time. The handwriting on the envelopes, elegant but slightly trembling, belonged to a woman. All were addressed to "My dear W.A." and simply signed as C. Emily, aware of having discovered something significant, immediately brought the letters to Mr. Anderson. She found him in the vineyards, discussing details of the imminent harvest with Thomas, the foreman. The September sun bronzed his skin and silvered the grey at his temples, giving him a more earthly and accessible appearance than ever. Since announcing his plans to create the cooperative, something had changed in his bearing, a lightness, as if he had shed an invisible weight. "Excuse the interruption," said Emily, approaching with the box, "but I think you should see this." Mr. Anderson examined the letters with growing astonishment. "They're for my grandfather," he murmured, "but they're not from my grandmother. The initial doesn't match." That night, in the intimacy of the library, Michael and Emily read the mysterious missives together. They dated from 1932, when the Anderson wine empire was already established, but before the birth of Michael's father. The first letter revealed an astonishing truth. "My dear William, 20 years have passed since our last conversation, and yet when I close my eyes, I can hear your voice as if time had not elapsed. My father, on his deathbed, finally confessed to me the magnitude of his cruelty toward us, how he threatened to destroy you if I didn't distance myself from you, how he paid to set that trap in which you lost your brother. Now I understand that my flight to Chicago was not cowardice, but a sacrifice I made believing I was protecting you. Will you ever be able to forgive that I didn't trust enough in our love to tell you? Catherine." The subsequent letters narrated a story of lost love and remorse. Catherine, William Anderson's first love, had returned to California after becoming a widow, discovering that William was happily married to Elizabeth and had built a prosperous life. "I don't seek to disturb the happiness you've built. I only needed you to know the truth before it's too late for both of us. Some secrets are too heavy to carry to the grave." The last letter, however, contained a revelation that left Michael breathless. "The boy I left at St. Mary's orphanage carried your surname, though you never knew it. Now, turned into a man, he has returned to my side after years of searching. His name is Charles, and he has your eyes, William, your same determination. I don't seek recognition for him, only that you know that a part of our lost love endures in this world. He has promised to keep our secret and respect the life you've built." Michael dropped the letter, his face pale under the lamplight. "Charles," he murmured. "My Uncle Charles, my father's brother, whom I never knew because he died young." Emily took his hand, feeling how it trembled. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, noting that she had inadvertently shifted to the intimate form of address. Michael looked at her with unfocused eyes, as if seeing through her to the past. "My father always hated his brother," he said slowly. "He said he wasn't a true Anderson, that he had no right to the inheritance. Now I understand. Charles was the child of another love, another woman." He rose abruptly and walked to the window, his silhouette outlined against the starry night. Emily remained silent, respecting his inner process. "My grandfather never knew," Michael continued after a long silence. "These letters were hidden, probably by my grandmother. She must have discovered them and decided to conceal them to protect the family, to protect her son. Or perhaps to protect William from unnecessary pain," suggested Emily gently. "Sometimes we hide truths not out of fear, but out of compassion." Michael turned to her, his expression transformed by a sudden understanding. "All my life I've believed in the purity of lineage, in the importance of keeping the Anderson name immaculate," he said with a bitter laugh. "And it turns out that our family history is built on secrets and forbidden loves." Emily approached him, taking his face between her hands tenderly. "What I see is a story of real, imperfect people who loved with all their heart despite obstacles," she said softly. "Your grandfather lost one love but found another with your grandmother, and that love was strong enough to build all this." She gestured toward the window, to the vineyards that stretched under the moonlight. "Isn't that the true Anderson heritage?" she continued. "Not blood purity, but the capacity to love courageously, to rebuild after losses, to create beauty from pain." Michael rested his forehead against Emily's, closing his eyes. "It seems I was destined to repeat my grandfather's story," he murmured, "trapped between two worlds, between expectations and heart's desires." "With one difference," Emily responded. "You know the whole story. You can learn from it, honor it without repeating its mistakes." They separated slightly, looking into each other's eyes in the library's dimness. The letters on the table, yellowed by time, seemed to have finally fulfilled their purpose, revealing a truth that, though painful, was also liberating. "There's something else I need to show you," Michael said suddenly, making a decision. "Something I've been postponing for too long." He led her out of the library, through the moonlight-bathed rose garden, to a small annex building that Emily had always believed was a storeroom. Upon opening the door, he lit a lamp that revealed a surprising space, an art studio with canvases in various stages of completion, easels, brushes, and carefully organized pigments. "My true passion," confessed Michael, "the one my father considered improper for a serious businessman, the one I've kept secret my entire adult life." Emily toured the studio in amazement, observing the paintings, landscapes of the vineyards in different seasons, portraits of workers during the harvest, detailed studies of grapes and vines. They weren't the works of an amateur, but of an artist with technique and sensitivity. "They're beautiful," she said sincerely. "Why hide such talent?" Michael shrugged, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture. "My father said businessmen don't waste time with brushes," he explained. "That art was for dreamers without practical sense." He approached a canvas covered with a cloth in a corner of the studio. With a decisive gesture, he removed the cloth, revealing an unfinished portrait of Emily in the library, reading by the window, the evening light bathing her profile. "I began it the day after finding you with my grandfather's diary," he confessed. "I couldn't finish it. Each time I tried to capture your essence, I felt I was betraying all the expectations that had defined my life." Emily contemplated the portrait, moved by how Michael had captured not only her appearance, but something deeper, the intensity of her concentration, the passion for knowledge that had defined her since childhood. "There are no longer expectations limiting us," she said softly. "Only those we ourselves decide to accept." Michael took a brush as if testing its weight and balance after a long time. "During these weeks, while I've struggled with business decisions and reorganized New Hope, I've understood something fundamental," he said. "I don't want to be remembered as a rich man, but as an authentic man, someone who had the courage to live according to his own truths." The lamp projected dancing shadows on the studio walls, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Outside, the distant murmur of night workers preparing for the harvest reminded them that life continued its eternal cycle of death and rebirth, of constant transformation. "Catherine's letters, my grandfather's diaries, my own hidden fears," continued Michael, his voice gaining strength. "Everything points to the same lesson. Life is too brief to live it following scripts written by others." He took Emily's hands in his, stained with dried paint, and kissed them reverently. "I love you, Emily Wilson," he declared with simple sincerity. "Not as a whim, not as a rebellion against norms. I love you for your intelligence, your kindness, your courage. And I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you. no matter what the world says. Under the moonlight filtering through the studio window, among canvases that captured moments of ephemeral beauty, two souls finally found the courage to fully embrace their truth, without reservations or fears. And in that embrace, they felt that all the stories of the past converged to bless their shared future. The announcement was published on a Thursday in October in the California Observer, the newspaper with the largest circulation in the region. Emily held a copy with trembling hands, still unable to believe what her eyes were seeing. Grand transformation at New Hope Estate. Mr. Michael Anderson, owner of the renowned Anderson Wines, announces the creation of the first wine cooperative in California, where workers will be co-owners of the lands they work. Likewise, the Elizabeth Thornton Institute will be inaugurated for the education of children and young people without distinction of social class. The official presentation will take place during the Harvest Festival next Saturday, with the presence of merchants from the United States, Europe, and Asia. But it was the final paragraph that had unleashed a storm of comments throughout the region. Mr. Anderson takes this opportunity to announce his engagement to Miss Emily Wilson, who will direct the Educational Institute. The ceremony will be held in the New Hope Chapel at the end of the harvest. "Are you sure about this?" asked Emily, looking up at Michael, who was observing her reaction with a mixture of nervousness and determination. Once published, there's no turning back. Michael took the newspaper and left it on the breakfast table. The dining room, bathed in the golden autumn light, seemed a different space now that they openly shared their meals, without pretensions or barriers. "That's precisely what I want," he responded, taking her hands. "Clarity, truth, a public commitment that no one can question." The consequences were not long in coming. That same afternoon, James entered hurriedly into the library where Emily was cataloguing books for the new school. "Miss Emily," he announced with a worried expression, "your parents are here." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. Months had passed since her last tense encounter with them in town. The letters she had sent explaining her feelings had gone unanswered. She found them in the main hall, uncomfortable among the luxurious furnishings. Her mother, Margaret, dressed in her best clothes, nervously clutched a handkerchief between her fingers. Her father, Robert, maintained an impenetrable expression beneath his graying mustache. "Mother, father," Emily greeted, advancing to kiss them. Her mother embraced her briefly, but her father remained rigid, limiting himself to a brief nod. "Is it true?" Robert asked directly. "What the newspaper says?" Emily nodded, instinctively straightening. "Yes, it's true," she confirmed. "Michael and I will marry after the harvest." Her mother let out a small sob. "How could you, daughter?" she asked with a broken voice. "The whole town is talking. They say that you've been—" "Enough, Margaret," Robert interrupted. "We haven't come to accuse but to understand." Emily looked at her father with surprise. She hadn't expected this relative moderation from a man known for his inflexible principles. "I love him, father," she said simply. "And he loves me. Not as a passing fancy, but with respect and admiration." Robert Wilson studied his daughter, noting the subtle changes in her bearing, the confidence emanating from her. "It's a different world from ours, Emily," he said finally. "A world that can be cruel to those who try to cross certain lines." "I know," she responded, "but it's also a world that changes. Michael is transforming New Hope Estate into a cooperative where workers will be co-owners. We're creating a school for all children regardless of their background." The mention of the school caught Robert's attention. As a carpenter who had struggled all his life to give his daughter the best possible, education represented a dream he had never been able to fully achieve. "A school?" he repeated. "For any child?" Emily nodded enthusiastically. "With a complete library, classes in traditional crafts and modern knowledge," she explained. "Michael believes, as I do, that true change begins with education." At that moment, as if he had been waiting for the right signal, Michael entered the room. He had changed from his work clothes into more formal attire, but without the ostentation that usually accompanied men of his position. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," he greeted, advancing to shake Robert's hand. "It's an honor to receive you in our home." The hour did not go unnoticed by Emily's parents. Margaret blushed intensely, but Robert held Michael's gaze, evaluating him. "I understand that our situation may seem irregular," continued Michael, But I assure you that my intentions toward your daughter are absolutely honorable. I admire her not only for her beauty, but for her intelligence, her kindness, and her courage." Robert maintained silence for a long moment, observing how Michael remained beside Emily, not as an employer beside his employee, but as a man beside his equal. "My daughter has always been different," he said finally. "Since childhood, she looked beyond the horizon when other girls only saw what was before them. I suppose it was a matter of time until she found her own path. It wasn't an enthusiastic blessing, but it was an acknowledgement." Emily felt a weight lift from her heart. "We'll show you the school plans," she proposed. "Father, I thought perhaps you could advise us on the furniture we'll need." The tension in the environment began to gradually dissipate as Michael unfolded the plans on a table. Robert, unable to resist his professional interest, was soon pointing out possible improvements to the classroom design. Margaret, though still reserved, observed with growing fascination how her daughter discussed as an equal with Mr. Anderson on educational matters. Later, while Michael was showing Robert the vineyards, Margaret found a moment alone with Emily. "It's not what we dreamed for you," she said, instinctively arranging a rebellious lock of her daughter's hair. "I know, Mother," Emily responded gently. "You dreamed of a respectable son-in-law, a modest but dignified home, grandchildren who would grow up near you." Margaret nodded, her eyes bright with contained tears. "But now I see that your dreams are greater than mine," she added with a broken voice. "And perhaps that's how it should be. Each generation should fly higher than the previous one." The embrace that followed these words sealed a reconciliation that Emily had feared impossible. It wasn't complete approval, but it was acceptance, and for now that was enough. Her parents' visit was just the first step on a path of transformation. In the following weeks, as the vineyards were tinged with red and gold and the workers prepared for the harvest, Michael and Emily faced together each new challenge: cancellation letters from former clients, malicious rumors, doors that closed. But for every door that closed, another seemed to open. European merchants intrigued by the cooperative experiment, young progressive vintners eager to learn new methods, humble families who saw in the school an opportunity for their children. One afternoon, while supervising the construction of the new classrooms, an unexpected car arrived. An elderly man, with an aristocratic bearing but a kind gaze, descended with the help of a cane. "Henry Thornton," he introduced himself. "Distant cousin of Elizabeth Thornton, Michael's grandmother. I read about your plans in the newspaper and felt the need to meet you personally." It turned out that Henry not only approved of the project, but wished to contribute a substantial donation for the school and establish distribution contracts for the cooperative's wine in New York, where he had influential contacts. "Elizabeth would be proud," he said upon departing. "She always believed that education and the dignity of work were the true pillars of a just society." That night, as they contemplated the stars from the vintner's tower, Emily rested her head on Michael's shoulder. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. Michael kissed her forehead, inhaling the jasmine scent of her hair. "Every day," he confessed, "afraid of failing, of not living up to this vision we've created together. But it's a different fear from what I felt before, when I feared disappointing the ghosts of the past or others' expectations." Emily intertwined her fingers with his, feeling the contrast between her soft hands and his, hardened by recent work in the vineyards, where he now spent more time than ever. "It's the fear of one who dares to dream," she said, "the natural companion of those who choose truth, however uncomfortable, over the safety of appearances." Under that infinite sky, as preparations for the harvest advanced and the estate physically transformed to reflect its spiritual transformation, both felt they had finally found their true home, not in the walls of New Hope Estate, but in the shared certainty that love, when authentic, has the power to change not just two lives, but an entire world around them. The harvest had begun at dawn, with the horizon barely tinged with pink and orange. For the first time in the history of New Hope Estate, everyone participated, from Michael, who had abandoned his employer's suit for work clothes, to the children who ran about carrying small baskets, to Emily, who alternated between helping with the collection and documenting the process for the school archives. The atmosphere was festive, yet focused. This year, the harvest had a special significance. It would be the first produced under the new cooperative system, where each worker would have a share in the benefits. The shared responsibility was reflected in the meticulousness with which each grape was examined, each basket carefully transported. "I've never seen such dedication," commented Thomas, the foreman, while supervising the work. "It's as if each person feels these vines are partially theirs." "Because they are," responded Michael, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm, "and what's one's own is cared for differently." Emily observed the scene from a small promontory, taking notes for what would be the first textbook of the school, The Cycle of the Vine, a project that would combine botany, local history, and practical economics. Beside her, Sarah, the teacher, enthusiastically discussed how to integrate the harvest experience into the curriculum. The transformation in Michael was evident to all. The distant businessman had given way to a man who knew each worker by name, who listened to their suggestions, who dirtied his hands with the same earth as they did. The worry lines that had previously furrowed his brow had been replaced by expression lines around his eyes, testimony to more frequent smiles. At noon, when the sun reached its zenith and the heat forced a pause, everyone gathered under the shade of century-old oak trees. The women had prepared a communal meal: fried chicken, cornbread, artisan cheese, and freshly baked bread. Wine from the previous year flowed generously, shared in pottery mugs that passed from hand to hand. Emily found herself seated between Mrs. Parker, the former cook who now supervised the logistics of community meals, and Margaret, her mother, who after the reconciliation had begun to regularly visit New Hope Estate, fascinated by the changes. "I never thought I'd see something like this," Margaret commented quietly, observing how Michael animatedly discussed with a group of harvesters completely oblivious to social distinctions. A gentleman like him, sharing a table with labourers. Mrs. Parker, whose experience at the estate spanned more than 3 decades, nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Anderson always had a good heart, but it was buried under the weight of what he believed he should be," she said. Emily helped him rediscover it. The comment made Emily blush, but before she could respond, a commotion at the property entrance caught everyone's attention. An elegant car, escorted by several riders, was approaching along the main path. Michael immediately stood up, his expression becoming serious. Emily approached his side, instinctively feeling that something important was about to happen. "It's the Montgomery crest," murmured Michael, recognizing the emblem on the car. "Victoria's father." Emily's heart skipped a beat. Charles Montgomery was one of the most powerful businessmen in Boston, known for his implacable temperament and his influence over the wine industry. The car stopped, and a corpulent man in his 60s with a severe face descended. Behind him, to everyone's surprise, appeared Victoria Montgomery, dressed with elegance but with an expression difficult to decipher. Michael advanced to receive them, maintaining his composure despite the evident tension. "Mr. Montgomery, Victoria," he greeted with a formal bow. "We weren't expecting your visit." Charles Montgomery surveyed the scene with his gaze. Workers interrupting their meal, baskets overflowing with grapes, Emily beside Michael in simple clothes. "Evidently," he responded dryly. "Had we known, perhaps you would have put on something more appropriate to receive visitors." The silence that followed was as dense as the must that already began to flow in the winery. Emily felt all present holding their breath, anticipating a conflict. But then, something unexpected occurred. Victoria took a step forward, separating herself from her father. "We've come because I read your announcement in the newspaper, Michael," she said, her voice warmer than Emily remembered. "About the cooperative and the school." Michael nodded cautiously. "It's our project, yes," he confirmed, unconsciously taking Emily's hand. "A new way of understanding New Hope Estate." Victoria briefly looked at their joined hands, but without the hostility Emily had feared. "I'd like to know more details," she said, "particularly about the school. We have a family foundation that supports educational initiatives, right, Father?" Charles Montgomery appeared uncomfortable, as if events weren't following the script he had anticipated. "Victoria insisted on coming," he explained stiffly. "Although personally I consider this experiment of yours doomed to failure, Anderson." Michael maintained his dignity, but it was Emily who responded. "We invite you to tour the property, Mr. Montgomery," she offered, "to speak with the workers, to learn about our plans. Perhaps you'll find that there's more than one path to building a lasting legacy." Emily's boldness seemed to surprise the Montgomery patriarch, who studied her with renewed interest. "So you're the famous Emily Wilson," he said, a trace of involuntary respect in his tone. The woman who has achieved what half of Boston couldn't, getting Michael Anderson to reconsider his priorities. The tour that followed was revealing for all parties. Emily and Michael showed their visitors every aspect of the project: the school plans, the profit-sharing system, the new winemaking methods that combined tradition with French innovations. Charles Montgomery, though maintaining a skeptical facade, couldn't completely hide his professional interest, especially in the technical improvements. Victoria, for her part, showed a facet that Emily didn't know. Far from the frivolous and calculating woman she had briefly met, she now revealed a genuine interest in education and surprising knowledge about modern pedagogy. "I studied at Radcliffe," she explained, when Emily commented on her enthusiasm. "I always wanted to do something meaningful with that knowledge, but—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the look she directed at her father completed the thought. Family expectations had dictated a different path for her as well. As evening fell, when the sun was beginning to set, and the workers were returning to their homes with the satisfaction of a job well done, Charles Montgomery finally broke his reserve. "It's not how I would do things," he admitted, contemplating the vineyards from the main terrace. "But there's a certain integrity in your approach that's intriguing." Michael nodded, accepting the comment as the highest compliment he could expect from a man like Montgomery. "Different terroirs produce different wines," he responded. "None is inherently superior, just distinct." Before departing, to everyone's surprise, Charles Montgomery made an unexpected proposal. "The Montgomery Foundation could finance a section of your school," he said, as one who makes an ordinary business decision. "The library, perhaps, as long as specific training in viticulture is included for the older students." After their departure, as dust from the road still floated in the air, Emily and Michael looked at each other, assimilating what had happened. "What was that?" asked Emily, somewhere between amused and confused. Michael smiled, embracing her by the waist as they watched the car disappear in the distance. "I think we just witnessed something rare in our world, Emily. Someone changing their mind." That night, during the communal dinner that closed the first day of harvest, Michael stood up, requesting everyone's attention. The courtyard, illuminated by lanterns and candles, vibrated with conversations and laughter from entire families gathered together. "Today we've harvested more than grapes," he said, his voice clear in the warm night. "We've harvested the fruits of a new way of working together, of trusting each other, of sharing not just burdens, but also dreams." He raised his glass, and all others rose in response. "To new hope," he continued, "not just for this land that sustains us, but for hope itself, the certainty that together we can create something better than anyone could achieve alone." Emily observed Michael with a heart overflowing with pride and love. The man who now spoke with such passion and conviction was as much the result of his own courage as of the transformation they had experienced together. Like the vines that surrounded them, they had grown intertwined, mutually strengthening each other. As the music of fiddles began to sound and some couples were encouraged to dance under the stars, Emily thought of the long road traveled since that first night of nervousness, when she adjusted the white dress her mother had chosen. In less than a year, everything had changed: the estate, Michael, herself, and yet the fragrance of the vineyard remained the same, reminding her that some things, the most essential ones, remain constant even amid the most profound transformations. The eve of the grand official presentation of the cooperative dawned with a sky of such an intense blue that it seemed unreal. Emily awoke early, moved by a mixture of enthusiasm and nervousness. Today, visitors would arrive from all over the United States and several European countries: merchants, journalists, vintners, government representatives. New Hope Estate would become, for one day, the center of attention of the entire wine industry. While supervising the final preparations in the great courtyard, where the main ceremony would take place, she couldn't help marveling at the transformation of the place. Garlands of flowers and vine leaves decorated the columns. Long tables covered with white tablecloths waited to be occupied. A small stage had been built for the speeches and the official signing of the documents that would legally establish the cooperative. Michael, for his part, seemed strangely calm as he reviewed his speech in the library. When Emily entered to inform him that the first cars were already visible on the road, she found him contemplatively looking at a portrait of his grandfather. "Are you all right?" she asked, approaching to smooth a non-existent wrinkle in his jacket. Michael took her hand and kissed it softly. "I'm at peace," he responded. "For the first time in a long time, I feel I'm exactly where I should be, doing what I should do." The gleam in his eyes confirmed his words. This was a man who had found his purpose, who had finally reconciled the various facets of himself. The arrival of guests transpired throughout the morning. Journalists from New York and Chicago, European and Asian merchants, curious aristocratic families, but also, to the surprise of many, delegations of workers from other estates sent to observe and report on the New Hope experiment. Among the crowd, Emily distinguished familiar faces. Her parents, visibly nervous but proud, Mrs. Parker and James, converted into the event's main supervisors, the minister from Oakidge, who had overcome his initial reservations to support a project that would benefit so many needy families. There were also unexpected faces, the senator's wife without her husband but accompanied by her daughter Catherine, both observing everything with expressions that oscillated between curiosity and disdain. Henry Thornton, who had traveled from New York specifically for the event, and surprisingly, Victoria Montgomery, who was animatedly conversing with Sarah about the plans for the school. The crucial moment came at noon. Michael ascended the small stage, accompanied by Thomas as representative of the workers and by the notary who would certify the documents. Emily remained among the public, knowing this was a moment he should lead alone. "Welcome to New Hope Estate," Michael began, his clear and firm voice extending through the silent courtyard. "Some of you have come out of curiosity, others out of skepticism, some out of genuine interest. To all, thank you for witnessing what we consider not a radical experiment, but a return to fundamental values." He paused, surveying the attendees with his gaze before continuing. "My grandfather, William Anderson, began with 3 acres of rocky land and a dream. He was a simple man who understood a profound truth, that the land doesn't truly belong to whoever possesses its legal title, but to those who work it with love, who know its secrets, who respect its cycles." A murmur of approval arose among the present workers, while some aristocrats exchanged uneasy glances. "For generations, we've perpetuated a system that artificially separates those who make decisions from those who execute the work," he continued. "We've believed that wealth can only accumulate in few hands, that knowledge must be restricted to an elite. Today, at New Hope Estate, we challenge that belief." Michael proceeded to explain the functioning of the cooperative, how each worker family would receive a share proportional to their years of service, how important decisions would be made in councils where everyone would have a voice, how the school would ensure that future generations would have tools to continue and improve the project. Many will ask, why? Why cede control and benefits that legally belong to me? He said, his tone becoming more personal. My answer is simple, because I've discovered that true wealth isn't measured in lands or money, but in human dignity. Because I've learned, thanks to brave people who have shown me a different path, that the true legacy isn't what we accumulate, but what we share. His gaze found Emily among the crowd, and a knowing smile formed on his lips. The speech was received with a deafening ovation from the workers and their families, respectful applause from foreign merchants, and an evaluative silence from the local aristocracy. But what followed exceeded all expectations. One after another, representatives of different groups approached the stage. Henry announced the creation of a scholarship that would allow the school's most outstanding graduates to study viticulture in France. European merchants signed contracts for the exclusive export of the cooperative's wines to Paris and London. Even young Catherine, to her mother's astonishment, volunteered to teach French at the school. The most surprising moment, however, came when Victoria Montgomery ascended the stage. With grace and determination, she announced that the Montgomery Foundation would not only finance the library, as her father had suggested, but would establish a complete exchange program with similar schools in New York. Some of us take longer to recognize the value of authenticity, she said, with a significant look toward Michael. But when we do, we discover there are many ways to build a life with meaning. The formal ceremony culminated with the signing of the documents that legally established the New Hope Wine Cooperative. When Michael handed the pen to Thomas for him to sign as representative of the workers, many couldn't contain their tears. It was a symbolic but powerful gesture, the recognition of a fundamental equality that transcended centuries of hierarchy. The celebration that followed extended well into the night. Music, dancing, abundant food, and of course, the best wine from New Hope Estate flowing generously. Emily observed everything from a corner of the courtyard, savoring each moment, engraving in her memory the expressions of joy and dignity on the faces of people who, for the first time, felt their work was truly valued. Michael found her there, offering her a glass of wine and a moment of tranquility amid the bustle. "You did it," she said, gently toasting. "You've changed the lives of so many people." Michael shook his head, his eyes bright under the lantern light. "We did it together," he corrected. "Your vision, your courage, your refusal to accept that things must continue as they've always been, that's what started it all." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, contemplating the celebration unfolding before them. "You know what I think," she said after a moment, "that your grandfather and grandmother are seeing this somehow, and that they're proud." Michael embraced her more tightly, kissing her hair. "There's something else I want to show you," he whispered. "Something I've been preparing in secret." He led her away from the bustle of the celebration, along paths illuminated by the full moon, to a small clearing among century-old oaks. There, to Emily's amazement, she discovered a small stone building she hadn't seen before, with a wooden door carved with motifs of vines and flowers. "What is this?" she asked, intrigued. Michael smiled mysteriously as he opened the door, revealing a surprising interior. A small house perfectly furnished with simplicity but exquisite taste. A living room with bookshelves full of books, a bedroom with a wrought-iron bed covered with a lace quilt, a tiny but functional kitchen, a modern bathroom, and most impressive, a studio with 2 desks facing a panoramic window that would offer, in daylight, a spectacular view of the vineyards. "Our home," explained Michael, observing Emily's amazed reaction. "For after the wedding. I thought that although the main house will continue being the administrative center of the cooperative, we'll need a space that's just ours. A place where you can write your books for the school, where I can paint, where we can simply be." Emily toured every corner in amazement, recognizing personal touches that revealed how much thought Michael had put into every detail. The titles of her favorite books on the shelves, an antique vase identical to one she had admired in town, flower seeds waiting to be planted in the small garden. "It's perfect," she finally said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's exactly what I would have dreamed if I had dared to dream so high." Michael gently took her by the shoulders, turning her to face him. "This is just the beginning, Emily," he said with an intense voice. "The beginning of a life where we dare to dream, to create, to transform. Not just for us, but for all who will come after." At that moment, surrounded by the silence of the California night, with the distant echoes of the celebration reminding them of all they had achieved, Michael and Emily sealed with a kiss the promise of a shared future. Their future built on the foundations of the past but freed from its limitations, enriched by the truth they had discovered together. That authentic love not only transforms those who experience it, but has the power to change the world around it. The chapel of New Hope Estate, with its simple American beauty, had never looked so radiant. Arrangements of blooming vines and white roses decorated each pew, and the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, creating multicolored patterns on the stone floor. The guests, an unusual mixture of local aristocracy, estate workers, and town families, waited with contained anticipation. Emily, in a side room prepared as an improvised dressing room, contemplated her reflection in an antique mirror. The dress, designed by a seamstress from San Francisco, combined elegance with simplicity, ivory silk with subtle embroidery of wildflowers, without the excesses of lace or gemstones that fashion dictated for wealthy brides. Her hair, gathered in a low chignon, was adorned only with a silver comb and fresh white roses. "You're beautiful, daughter," said Margaret, nervously smoothing an invisible fold in the dress. "Like a dream." Her mother, dressed in her best finery, tried to disguise the tears that threatened to ruin her careful makeup. She had traveled a long road from her initial opposition to this proud acceptance. "Thank you, Mother," Emily responded, gently squeezing her hand, "for being here, for finally supporting us." Margaret shook her head, as if apologizing. "I was afraid for you," she confessed. "Afraid they would hurt you, that they would use you and discard you. I couldn't see beyond what the world had taught me to expect." Emily embraced her mother, perfectly understanding that fear. In a world where social differences dictated almost immutable destinies, her story with Michael seemed an anomaly, a challenge to unwritten rules. "And now what do you see?" she asked softly. Margaret separated to look her in the eyes, a new wisdom shining in hers. "I see that true love knows no classes or fortunes," she responded, "and that my daughter has found not just a husband, but a soul companion." The sound of music beginning in the chapel interrupted the moment. It was the signal. Emily breathed deeply, preparing herself for the moment that would mark the official beginning of a life that, in many ways, they had already begun to build. Her father waited at the door, unusually elegant in a new suit. The carpenter, with calloused hands and a habitually severe expression, today showed a moving vulnerability. "I never thought I'd give my daughter away in a place like this," he said, as he offered her his arm. "To a man like this?" Emily smiled, recognizing in his words not criticism, but amazement. "Life takes us down unexpected paths, Father," she responded. "So it seems," Robert conceded. "And sometimes the unexpected paths turn out to be the right ones." The chapel doors opened, and all gazes turned toward them. Emily, who had feared feeling intimidated, discovered that a surprising calm invaded her as she advanced on her father's arm. Her gaze immediately found Michael, waiting beside the altar. Michael, dressed with simple elegance, observed her with an expression that combined reverence and pure joy. At his side, as best man, stood Thomas, the foreman-turned-cooperative administrator and close friend. On Emily's side, Sarah waited as maid of honor, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. The path to the altar seemed to contain all the history that had brought them to this moment. The obstacles overcome, the prejudices challenged, the personal transformations both had experienced. When her father finally placed her hand in Michael's, Emily felt they were completing a perfect circle. The ceremony, officiated by the minister from Oakidge, was intentionally simple but deeply significant. Instead of the traditional predetermined vows, Michael and Emily had insisted on writing their own promises. Michael was the first to speak, his firm voice resonating in the silent chapel. "Emily, when you came to New Hope Estate, I was living a life of appearances, trapped between what I believed I should be and what I truly was. You taught me that authenticity is not a luxury, but a necessity of the soul. You showed me that true value isn't in titles or properties, but in the courage to live according to one's own truth. I promise you today that we'll walk together this path of truth, that we'll build a life where appearances will never matter more than essence, where love will be our constant compass. I promise that each day I'll seek to be worthy of the gift that is your heart." Tears glistened in the eyes of many present. Even the minister, initially wary of these non-traditional vows, seemed moved. Emily, with a clear voice despite the emotion, responded, "Michael, I came to this house seeking employment and found a destiny. In your eyes I saw the man you could be when freed from the chains of expectations. In your heart I discovered a kindness and a passion that resonated with my own. I promise you today that I'll be your companion on all paths, the sunny and the stormy, that I'll remind you who you are when the world tries to confuse you, that I'll celebrate your triumphs without envy and sustain your failures without judgment. I promise that the love we declare today will be like the wine we cultivate. It will gain depth and character with each passing year, transforming even difficulties into something valuable. The exchange of rings, simple gold bands with their names and the date engraved inside, formally sealed the union, but it was the kiss that followed, tender yet laden with promise, that truly marked the beginning of their shared life. The subsequent celebration, held in the gardens of New Hope Estate, reflected the new philosophy that permeated the estate: long tables where all guests mingled without distinction, abundant food but without ostentation, music that combined classical pieces with the traditional folk music, so loved by the workers. At dusk, when the sky was tinged with pink and gold, Michael led Emily to a secluded corner of the gardens. There, to her surprise, a young grapevine had been planted. "Our vine," he explained, taking a small golden spade that waited beside the trunk. "An ancient tradition says that if newlyweds plant a vine together, their love will grow strong and bear fruit like it does." Together they finished setting the earth around the vine and ceremoniously watered it. It was a symbolic but deeply significant gesture, a commitment to the future, to creating roots and nurturing something that would grow beyond themselves. "Imagine how it will be in 20 years, said Emily, contemplating the slender trunk and small branches that would someday give shade and fruit. "Perhaps our children will play under its shade." Michael embraced her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both observed their planting. "And we'll tell them our story," he added, "of how the fragrance of the vineyard witnessed our love, of how we learned that true roots aren't in lineage or social class, but in the capacity to grow together." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, receiving congratulations and good wishes. Among the crowd, Emily distinguished faces that represented each chapter of their extraordinary journey, her parents animatedly conversing with Henry, Mrs. Parker and James dancing with the energy of those who celebrate not just a wedding, but a change of era, Thomas raising his glass in a silent toast, even Victoria Montgomery, who had found her own path of authenticity, directing her family's educational foundation. At midnight, when many guests had already retired and only the closest remained, Michael and Emily silently escaped to their new home among the oaks. The path was illuminated by lanterns arranged among the trees, creating a magical trail under the starry sky. Upon arriving, they found the door decorated with a garland of wildflowers and a small envelope pinned to the wood. Inside was a note written in different hands, signed by all the workers of New Hope Estate. "May this house always be a home of truth and courage. May the love that transformed New Hope continue to transform every life it touches. May the fragrance of the vineyard always remind you that the most enduring beauty is born from authenticity." Emily carefully saved the note, knowing she would treasure it forever. Michael opened the door and, following tradition, lifted her in his arms to cross the threshold. Inside, scented candles softly illuminated every corner. On the living room table waited a bottle of the first wine produced by the cooperative, simply labeled New Hope, First Harvest. "To us," said Michael, serving 2 glasses. "To the path traveled and the one that awaits us. To the truth that liberated us," added Emily, gently clinking her glass against his. "And to the love that gave us courage to embrace it." Later, as the moon bathed the small house with its silver light, 2 souls united by something deeper than the vows pronounced that day contemplated the future that stretched before them, as promising as the vineyards surrounding New Hope Estate. A future where the fragrance of the vineyard would continue to witness their love, a love that had transformed not just 2 individual lives, but an entire community. And in that moment of perfect stillness, Emily understood the most beautiful truth of all, that a true home is not a place, but a state of the soul, a state where one is fully oneself and completely loved precisely for it, where the roots of authenticity flourish in a garden of limitless possibilities. Like the young grapevine they had planted, their story together was just beginning. And like it, it would grow with each season, face storms and droughts, but would persist, offering its fruits and its aroma to the world, reminding everyone that authentic love, when allowed to flourish freely, has the power to transform not just individual hearts, but the entire world.